Welcome to Book Nibbles. Big ideas, small bites. The story of America's struggle for independence, as told in Killing England by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard, is not simply a recitation of military campaigns, political declarations, or famous speeches carved into marble. Instead, it is a deeply human account of the Revolution's most recognizable figures: Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Adams, and others, placed alongside their flaws, their doubts, and the daily difficulties of a war that, by any rational measure, should have been lost before it began. The book brings forward the smell of gunpowder, the hunger of shivering soldiers, the whispers in taverns, the scorn of kings, and the constant sense that a dream of liberty was dangling by a thread. It opens by setting the stage in a world where England is the most powerful empire on earth. The British Crown, under King George III, presides over colonies that have provided wealth, resources, and loyalty for decades. But beneath the surface, tensions simmer. Taxes levied without representation stir bitterness. Ordinary colonists, farmers, tradesmen, and merchants feel exploited. Intellectuals and leaders, such as Samuel Adams and Patrick Henry, give voice to grievances that might have remained quiet if not for England's arrogance in ignoring them. From the very beginning, the conflict is portrayed not as an inevitable clash of civilizations, but as a series of miscalculations, Britain underestimating the resolve of its colonists, and the colonists daring to believe that freedom was worth more than security. George Washington enters the narrative not as a flawless marble statue, but as a man of towering ambition mixed with moments of self-doubt. He longs for recognition and respect, often more than money. He is conscious of his reputation, sensitive to slights, and yet possessed of a kind of stern dignity that makes others instinctively look to him in times of crisis. His military record prior to the Revolution is far from glorious. Defeats and near disasters during the French and Indian War taught him harsh lessons about discipline, supply, and the unpredictability of battle. These early experiences forged in him both caution and resilience, qualities that would define his leadership of the Continental Army. Meanwhile, figures such as Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin are painted in vivid strokes. Jefferson, the aristocratic Virginian, is brilliant and eloquent but physically frail, often plagued by illness and given to melancholy. His words would inspire a movement, even if he himself was not destined to lead armies or dominate political assemblies in person. Franklin, by contrast, is worldly, witty, and pragmatic. Already an elder statesman by the time of the Revolution, Franklin is as comfortable in Parisian salons as he is tinkering with inventions or negotiating alliances. His charm and intellect would prove invaluable, especially in convincing France to risk its own stability by supporting the American cause. The narrative dives into the spark of revolution, the Boston Tea Party, the intolerable acts, and the escalating clashes between colonists and British troops. O'Reilly and Dugard emphasize how small incidents, often chaotic and unplanned, snowballed into legendary turning points. The Boston Massacre, for example, was not a coordinated assault, but a confused street confrontation in which frightened soldiers fired into a mob. Yet its portrayal as a deliberate slaughter ignited outrage across the colonies. Such framing, whether fair or exaggerated, fueled the growing sense of injustice that no tax repeal or parliamentary concession could now soothe. When the shooting war begins in earnest, the imbalance of power is striking. Britain commands the most disciplined army and the most powerful navy in the world. Its redcoats are professionals, hardened by campaigns across continents. The colonists, by contrast, are an improvised force of farmers, shopkeepers, and tradesmen. They lack weapons, uniforms, and even shoes. Desertion is common, supplies are scarce, and pay is unreliable. Washington must hold together this fragile army through sheer willpower and the force of his example. He spends as much time pleading with Congress for support as he does planning battles. The book underscores again and again that the Revolution's survival hinged less on decisive victories than on avoiding total collapse. Washington's genius was often not in defeating the enemy outright, but in keeping his army alive long enough for circumstances to shift. The Battle of Bunker Hill illustrates this paradox. Technically, it is a British victory. They seized the ground after bloody fighting. But the cost is so high that the colonists, though forced to retreat, gain confidence. The idea that ordinary men could stand toe-to-toe with the king's troops and inflict staggering casualties is revolutionary in itself. From this moment, the dream of independence is no longer a fantasy, but a tantalizing possibility. Still, hope is tempered by reality. For every Bunker Hill, there are crushing defeats, such as the loss of New York, where Washington's army barely escapes annihilation thanks to a miraculous nighttime retreat across the East River. Again and again, the book stresses how thin the line was between survival and disaster. The winter at Valley Forge becomes a defining chapter. Soldiers starve, freeze, and die of disease while Congress dithers and supplies vanish into corrupt hands. Morale sinks, so low that mutiny seems likely. Washington rides among his troops, enduring the same hardships, refusing to abandon them. His presence alone, calm and unyielding, becomes the glue that holds the army together. Baron von Steuben, the eccentric Prussian officer, emerges here as an unlikely hero. With flamboyant language and relentless drilling, he instills discipline into the ragtag force, transforming them into something resembling a professional army. It is a turning point not measured by battles won, but by character hardened. Parallel to the battlefield struggles are the political maneuvers. Jefferson's drafting of the Declaration of Independence is given dramatic weight. The soaring words about equality and unalienable rights mask the internal conflicts among the delegates. Some still cling to hopes of reconciliation with Britain, others fear the economic and social upheaval independence might bring. Jefferson himself writes in a feverish burst, his quill scratching across parchment while the weight of history presses upon him. Franklin and Adams edit his words, softening some edges, strengthening others. The final document is a compromise, yet it carries a power that transcends the disputes of its authors. Once published, there is no turning back. The colonies have declared themselves a nation, and the war becomes not just a rebellion, but a fight for survival. King George III looms over the narrative as both villain and tragic figure. He is not a tyrant in the mold of ancient despots, but a stubborn, narrow-minded ruler convinced of his divine right and unwilling to consider compromise. He sees the colonists as ungrateful children who must be disciplined, not as subjects with legitimate grievances. His refusal to bend, even when the war drags on and costs mount, ultimately dooms Britain's efforts. O'Reilly and Dugard portray him as a man trapped by his own sense of duty and by a monarchy that cannot admit error without unraveling. His eventual descent into madness years later becomes an almost symbolic reflection of the empire's failure to hold onto America. The entry of France into the war shifts the balance. Franklin's diplomacy in Paris, with his fur cap and grandfatherly charm, masks shrewd calculation. He flatters, persuades, and manipulates the French court into seeing the American cause as an opportunity to humble their ancient enemy, Britain. French ships and soldiers bring hope, but they also bring complications. Alliances are fragile, egos clash, and coordination is often poor. Still, without France, independence would have been nearly impossible. The Southern Campaign adds another layer of brutality. Battles in the Carolinas are savage, neighbor against neighbor, loyalist against patriot. At times it resembles a civil war more than a fight against a foreign power. Figures like Nathaniel Greene and Daniel Morgan demonstrate ingenuity, using guerrilla tactics and hit-and-run strategies that frustrate British commanders. These skirmishes, though small compared to the grand battles in the north, bleed the British army and sap its strength. The climax arrives at Yorktown, where Washington seizes his moment. With French troops under Rochambeau and a French fleet controlling the seas, the trap is sprung. Cornwallis finds himself surrounded. The The siege grinds on until surrender is inevitable. The scene of British soldiers marching out to lay down their arms while a band plays "The World Turned Upside Down" encapsulates the surreal nature of the victory. Against all odds, a group of farmers and tradesmen, led by an untested general and sustained by ideals of liberty, have defeated the greatest empire of their age. Yet the book does not end with triumph alone. It lingers on the costs. Washington longs to return to Mount Vernon, weary of command. Soldiers go home with scars, both visible and hidden. The new nation is fragile, deeply in debt, divided by regional interests, and uncertain whether its grand experiment in self-government can endure. The ideals of liberty clash with the reality of slavery, a contradiction Jefferson himself embodies. The revolution has been won, but the struggle to define America is only beginning. Throughout, O'Reilly and Dugard weave in the personal lives of their subjects, the love affairs, the illnesses, the rivalries, the private letters that reveal doubts and fears. These humanizing details remind us that history is not carved in inevitability. It is shaped by flawed men and women making choices under pressure, often blind to their long-term consequences. Washington's stoicism, Jefferson's eloquence, Franklin's wit, and even King George's obstinacy all intertwine to create the drama of independence. By the end, the reader is left with a sense of wonder not only at the outcome, but at the fragility of the path taken. A misstep here, a harsher winter there, a missed opportunity by Franklin in Paris, and the revolution might have collapsed. That it did not is a testament to resilience, vision, and the refusal of ordinary people to accept subjugation. Killing England tells this story with urgency and color, reminding us that freedom was neither inevitable nor free. It was fought for in mud and snow, in cramped meeting halls, in whispered conspiracies, and on bloody fields, carried forward by leaders who were as human as any of us. The narrative closes with Washington's farewell, an act as profound as any battlefield victory. By surrendering power willingly and retiring to his farm, he sets a precedent that kings and emperors across history rarely embraced. In that gesture lies the true foundation of the American Republic. Not just the defeat of Britain, but the choice to create a government rooted in liberty rather than tyranny. The Revolution, in the telling of O'Reilly and Dugard, is not simply about battles won or treaties signed, but about a vision of what people could choose to become if they dared. And that's it. Killing England. The Brutal Struggle for American Independence by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard. Thanks for listening to Book Nibbles. If you enjoyed this bite-sized book, don't forget to subscribe for more quick, insightful summaries. See you in the next nibble.